You're not my husband anymore!
If that's truly what you want, I won't force you to stay. Before I leave, there's one last thing you need to know.
Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you gave them everything, only to hear them say, "You're not my husband anymore"? That was exactly what happened to Daniel Carter, a man who had spent 27 years building not only a $10 million mansion, but also what he believed was the perfect marriage. He thought loyalty lasted forever. He was wrong, because on one cold Friday evening, the woman he had loved more than his own life stood in the middle of their luxury living room, looked directly into his eyes, and said the words that destroyed everything. "You're not my husband anymore." The room became completely silent. Their daughter froze. The family lawyer stopped writing. Even the grandfather clock on the wall seemed louder than before. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. Instead, he quietly reached into his pocket, pulled out a small golden key, walked to the massive front entrance of the mansion, and stepped outside. Sophia laughed. She believed he was finally leaving forever. But Daniel calmly closed the enormous iron gate, turned the key. Click. The electronic lock echoed through the night. Sophia's smile slowly disappeared. She walked toward the gate. It wouldn't open. She frowned. "Daniel, what are you doing?" For the first time that night, Daniel smiled. Not a smile of revenge, a smile of truth. Then he quietly said, "This mansion was never yours." Sophia's face turned pale. She stared at him in complete disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Daniel slowly placed an old brown envelope on the hood of his black Rolls-Royce. Inside were documents she had never seen before. Legal documents, ownership papers, a trust agreement signed 22 years earlier. The mansion, the land, even the private lake behind it, had never belonged to Sophia. And what happened next left the entire family speechless. But before we continue, tell us in the comments. If someone betrayed your trust after 27 years, would you forgive them? Because Daniel Carter's answer changed not only one family, but thousands of lives forever. 3 days earlier, the Carter mansion stood on top of a quiet hill overlooking the city. People often slowed their cars just to admire it. To the outside world, it looked like the home of a perfect family. But beautiful houses can hide painful secrets. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., Daniel Carter woke up before everyone else. At 55 years old, he still followed the same routine he had practiced for nearly 30 years. He made fresh coffee, watered the flowers his late mother had planted, fed 2 golden retrievers waiting happily in the backyard, and quietly watched the sunrise from the balcony. Those 20 peaceful minutes were the happiest part of his day, because once the rest of the house woke up, the silence disappeared, and so did the peace. Daniel wasn't born rich. 30 years earlier, he had been a construction worker earning just enough to pay rent. He spent his evenings studying business from old library books. While others slept, he worked. While others complained, he learned. Failure visited him many times. His first company collapsed. His second business lost almost everything. Friends laughed. Relatives said, "Give up." But Daniel never stopped, because one person always believed in him. Sophia. Back then, she wasn't interested in money. She loved the hardworking young man who dreamed of building a better future. They married in a tiny church with only 14 guests. Instead of an expensive honeymoon, they spent the weekend painting the walls of their first rented apartment. Daniel often smiled whenever he remembered those days. "We were poor, but we were happy." Years passed. His third company became successful. Then another. Then another. Slowly, the impossible became reality. The man who once borrowed money for groceries now owned businesses worth millions. Finally, he built the mansion Sophia had always dreamed about. A beautiful home with tall glass windows, a private lake, a large garden, and a grand iron gate that could be seen from the road. The day they moved in, Sophia hugged Daniel tightly and whispered, "This isn't just your dream. It's ours." Daniel believed every word. He even had those words engraved inside a silver frame hanging near the fireplace. For years, every guest admired it. But something changed. Not suddenly. Slowly. Almost invisibly. As more money entered the house, warmth quietly left it. Sophia no longer joined Daniel for breakfast. Family dinners became rare. Phone calls became shorter. Smiles became forced. Instead of talking to Daniel, she spent more time at luxury events, fashion shows, and exclusive parties. Daniel noticed, but he never complained. He simply told himself, "She's enjoying the life we worked so hard to build." He wanted her to be happy, even if it meant seeing her less. One evening, Daniel returned home carrying a small gift box. Inside was a simple silver necklace, not because it was expensive, but because it looked exactly like the one Sophia wore on their wedding day. He smiled as he walked into the living room. "Sophia?" No answer. The house felt strangely empty. A few minutes later, he heard laughter coming from the dining room. Sophia sat there with 3 wealthy friends. Designer handbags covered the table. Luxury shopping bags surrounded their chairs. Daniel smiled politely. "I brought you something." Sophia barely looked at him. "What is it?" A little surprise. She opened the box, looked at the necklace for 2 seconds, then quietly placed it back inside. One of her friends laughed softly. "Oh, that's sweet." Another whispered, "I thought millionaires bought diamonds, not silver." The women giggled. Daniel pretended not to hear. Sophia forced a smile. "Thank you." Then she turned back to her friends and continued talking as if Daniel wasn't even standing there. For the first time in years, the mansion felt colder than winter. Daniel slowly closed the gift box. He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He simply walked upstairs. Alone, standing on the balcony that night, he looked across the city lights and quietly asked himself one painful question. When did success begin costing me the people I love? He had no idea that within 72 hours, everything he believed about his marriage would be destroyed forever. 72 hours before everything changed. Daniel Carter couldn't sleep. The silver necklace still lay unopened on his bedroom dresser. Not because Sophia didn't like it, but because she never even looked at it. Daniel quietly picked it up, running his fingers across the tiny heart-shaped pendant. He smiled sadly. I guess some things become too simple when life becomes too expensive. The next morning, he left the mansion earlier than usual. Instead of driving to his corporate headquarters, he stopped at a small neighborhood cafe. It was the same cafe where he and Sophia had shared breakfast every Saturday before success changed their lives. The owner immediately recognized him. "Mr. Carter, it's been years." Daniel smiled. Some memories are worth coming back for. He ordered 2 cups of coffee. Out of habit. A few seconds later, he quietly laughed at himself. Old habits never really disappear. As he prepared to leave, he noticed an elderly man sitting alone near the window. The man wore old clothes. His shoes were worn out, but he sat with dignity. On the table was a small envelope. Across the front, someone had written in black ink, "Final notice." The old man stared at it for several minutes. Without opening it, Daniel slowly walked over. "May I sit?" The old man nodded. "My name is Daniel." The man smiled weakly. "Arthur." Daniel pointed toward the envelope. "Tough news." Arthur hesitated. "My wife needs surgery. I sold almost everything." But he stopped speaking. Daniel didn't ask another question. He simply looked at the cafe cashier, then quietly paid Arthur's breakfast, and slipped several folded bills beneath the envelope without saying a word. Arthur looked down. His eyes widened. "No, I can't accept this." Daniel gently smiled. "Years ago, someone helped me when I had nothing. I'm only returning the favor." Arthur stood with tears in his eyes. He reached into his pocket and handed Daniel a tiny wooden cross. "It's all I have." Daniel tried to refuse, but Arthur closed Daniel's hand around it. "Keep it. It reminds people that kindness always finds its way home." Daniel placed the small wooden cross carefully inside his coat pocket. He had no idea those words would become true much sooner than he expected. Later that afternoon, Daniel arrived back at the mansion. Something immediately felt different. 3 unfamiliar luxury cars were parked outside. Laughter echoed from inside the house. As he entered, he found Sophia hosting another elegant gathering. Crystal glasses, expensive decorations, live violin music. It looked more like a luxury hotel than a family home. One guest whispered, "That's Daniel. I thought he'd be taller." Another laughed quietly. Sophia heard them, but said nothing. Daniel smiled politely. "Good afternoon." Sophia barely looked at him. "Oh, you're home," one of the guests asked. "So Daniel, which interior designer created this mansion?" Before Daniel could answer, Sophia smiled confidently. I designed almost everything myself. Daniel remained silent. He remembered spending nearly 3 years working with architects, reviewing every blueprint, choosing every stone, planting every tree with his own hands. Yet, he said nothing, because sometimes, silence protects your dignity better than arguments ever can. As the evening continued, Daniel quietly walked upstairs. Standing alone on the balcony, he looked across the enormous estate, the gardens, the fountains, the lake, everything they had built together, or at least, everything he believed they had built together. Then, his phone vibrated. It was a message from his attorney. Daniel, I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent. Daniel stared at the message. A strange feeling settled in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but that meeting would reveal a secret hidden for more than 22 years. The next morning, Daniel Carter arrived at the office of his attorney, Michael Brooks. They had worked together for almost 25 years. Michael wasn't just Daniel's lawyer. He was the only person who knew every secret behind Daniel's success. As Daniel entered the office, he immediately noticed Michael wasn't smiling. Stacks of legal files covered the desk. A thick brown folder rested in the center. Michael looked up. I'm glad you came. Daniel sat down quietly. You said it was urgent. Michael slowly pushed the folder across the desk. I think it's time you knew the truth. Daniel frowned. What truth? Michael took a deep breath. Over the past 6 months, I've noticed something unusual. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of financial records, property searches, bank transfers, and private investigation reports. Daniel looked confused. What am I looking at? Michael answered softly. Sophia. Daniel's heart sank. Michael continued. At first, I thought it was nothing. But then, I hired an investigator. Daniel remained silent. Michael opened another file. These records show that Sophia has been meeting with divorce attorneys. Daniel couldn't believe what he was hearing. That's impossible. Michael nodded sadly. I hoped I was wrong. He placed several photographs on the desk. Sophia, leaving expensive restaurants, meeting secretly with a man Daniel had never seen before, signing documents, smiling, laughing. Daniel stared at the photographs. His hands slowly began to shake. There has to be an explanation. Michael looked directly into his eyes. I wanted there to be one. But there's more. He reached for the largest folder. You remember 22 years ago, when you created the Carter Family Trust? Daniel nodded. Of course. It was to protect the company if anything ever happened to us. Michael smiled faintly. And that's exactly why I'm showing you this today. He opened the original trust agreement. Every page carried Daniel's signature. The final page clearly stated, all ownership of the mansion, surrounding land, and business assets shall remain under the Carter Family Trust unless Daniel Carter personally authorizes otherwise. Daniel stared at the document. He had almost forgotten signing it. Michael continued. Sophia never actually owned the mansion. Legally, she couldn't sell it. She couldn't transfer it. And if she filed for divorce, she wouldn't automatically receive it. Daniel leaned back in his chair. For several seconds, he said nothing. Not because he was relieved, because he was heartbroken. He whispered, so she believes. Everything already belongs to her. Michael nodded. Yes. Daniel slowly closed the file. He looked out the office window toward the city skyline. So, what do I do now? Michael answered quietly. You don't have to do anything. The law is already protecting you. Daniel smiled sadly. I never wanted protection from my wife. I only wanted her love. The room fell silent. A few moments later, Daniel stood up. He placed the folder under his arm, and before leaving, he asked one final question. If she chooses money over our marriage, will there still be a way to protect her future? Michael looked surprised. After everything you've just learned, you're still thinking about her? Daniel gave a tired smile. You don't stop loving someone just because they stopped loving you. Michael watched him walk toward the door. In all his years as a lawyer, he had represented billionaires, celebrities, and powerful politicians. But he had never met a man who carried so much pain with so much grace. Daniel stepped outside. He reached into his pocket. The small wooden cross Arthur had given him yesterday was still there. He held it tightly and whispered, Please, give me the strength to do the right thing. Little did he know that by sunset, his entire world would collapse. Daniel drove home more slowly than usual. The thick brown folder rested on the passenger seat. Several times, he reached toward it. Several times, he pulled his hand back. Deep inside, he was still hoping Michael was wrong. Maybe the photographs had an explanation. Maybe the meetings were about something else. Maybe their marriage could still be saved. As the mansion came into view, Daniel noticed dozens of luxury cars parked outside. Bright lights filled the driveway. Live music echoed through the evening air. He frowned. No one told me we were having guests. He stepped out of his car. A valet hurried toward him. Good evening, sir. Daniel smiled politely. What's the occasion? The young man looked confused. I thought you knew. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Inside the mansion, more than 50 guests were laughing, drinking, and celebrating. Business executives, fashion influencers, local celebrities. Champagne glasses sparkled beneath the crystal chandeliers. Sophia stood in the center of the room, wearing a stunning red designer gown. She looked happier than Daniel had seen her in years. For a brief moment, he smiled. Maybe she had planned a surprise. Maybe tonight, everything would finally be okay. He slowly walked toward her. Sophia, she turned. Their eyes met. For only a second. Then her smile disappeared. The music slowly faded as guests noticed Daniel. Sophia took a deep breath. Everyone, I need your attention. The room became silent. Daniel looked around, confused. Sophia walked toward him, stopping only a few feet away. Her voice was calm, cold, emotionless. Daniel, I've been meaning to say this for a long time. Daniel felt every heartbeat. I don't love you anymore. A few guests exchanged nervous glances. Someone quietly lowered their glass. Daniel swallowed hard. Sophia, we can talk upstairs. She slowly shook her head. No, I want everyone to hear. She looked directly into his eyes, then said the sentence that shattered 27 years of marriage. You're not my husband anymore. Silence. Complete silence. Daniel couldn't move. He couldn't speak. The woman he had built a life with had ended their marriage. Like it meant nothing. Sophia continued. I've already spoken with my attorneys. The divorce papers are ready. I'm done pretending. I deserve a different life. Daniel looked around the room. Not one person spoke. Not one person defended him. Even their own relatives remained silent. After a long pause, Daniel quietly nodded. If that's truly what you want, I won't force you to stay. Sophia crossed her arms. I'm glad you understand. Daniel smiled gently. But before I leave, I need to do one last thing. Without another word, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He removed a small golden key. Guests watched in confusion. Daniel calmly walked toward the massive front doors. He stepped outside. Sophia laughed softly. I guess he's finally accepting reality. Several guests smiled awkwardly. Then, everyone heard it. Click. The heavy iron gate surrounding the mansion electronically locked. The security lights turned red. Sophia frowned. What was that? Daniel stood outside the gate. Calm. Composed. Holding the key in one hand. He looked back at Sophia. For the first time all night, his voice carried quiet strength. You're right. I'm not your husband anymore. He paused, then continued. But there's something you never knew. He slowly lifted the brown legal folder. This mansion was never yours. Sophia's confident smile vanished instantly. What? Daniel opened the folder, holding up the original Carter family trust documents. The mansion, the land, the private lake, and every dollar invested here has always belonged to the Carter family trust, and I am its only controlling trustee. Gasps filled the room. One guest whispered, She's serious trouble. Another looked at the documents in disbelief. Sophia rushed toward the gate. Daniel, open this gate. He looked at her with tears in his eyes. Not anger, not revenge, just sadness. I spent 27 years trying to build a home. I never realized I was building it alone. Sophia gripped the iron bars tightly. For the first time, fear replaced pride. Because she finally understood. She hadn't just lost a husband. She had lost the only man who had ever truly loved her. The silence outside the mansion felt endless. No one moved. No one spoke. Sophia stood behind the locked iron gate, her hands gripping the cold metal bars. For the first time in years, she looked frightened. Not because of the mansion, but because the man she thought she knew had quietly protected everything without ever telling her. Daniel slowly walked back toward the gate. Not to humiliate her, not to celebrate, but to end the lies. He carefully placed the brown folder on a small stone table beside the entrance. These papers belong to you now. Sophia looked confused. What is this? The truth. She opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents, trust agreements, property records, and one handwritten letter. The date on the first page caught her attention. 22 years ago, long before the mansion had even been built, long before Daniel became wealthy. She looked up. You planned this? Daniel shook his head. No, I protected our future. He continued quietly. When my first company almost went bankrupt, my lawyer advised me to create a family trust. So if everything collapsed, our family would still have a home. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. You never told me. Daniel smiled sadly. You never asked. The guests stood silently, listening to every word. Daniel looked around the room. I never built this mansion to impress strangers. I built it because Sophia once told me. She dreamed of a home where our children, and one day our grandchildren, would always feel safe. He looked back at Sophia. I remembered every dream you shared with me. I just didn't realize you had forgotten them. Sophia lowered her head. For the first time that evening, she couldn't look him in the eyes. One of the guests quietly whispered, I thought this was about money. It was never about money. Daniel heard the comment. He nodded gently. Exactly. If this was about money, I could replace every dollar. But trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. Their daughter, Emma, stepped forward. She had remained silent all evening. Tears streamed down her face. Dad, I'm so sorry. Daniel opened his arms. Emma ran to him and hugged him tightly. I should have called you. I should have listened. I believed what everyone else was saying. Daniel kissed her forehead. You don't have to apologize for being confused. You only have to learn from it. Emma cried even harder. Meanwhile, Sophia slowly unfolded the handwritten letter inside the folder. It wasn't written by a lawyer. It wasn't a contract. It was written by Daniel. 22 years earlier. The letter read, If you're reading this one day, it means something has gone terribly wrong. I never created this trust because I didn't trust you. I created it because I wanted to make sure our family would always have a home, no matter what happened to me. If I leave this world before you, I hope this house continues to protect you, just as you protected me when I had nothing. Sophia couldn't continue reading. Her vision blurred with tears. She slowly covered her face. Daniel looked away. He couldn't bear to watch her cry. Not after everything. Not after tonight. The guests who had admired Sophia only an hour earlier now stood in complete silence. No applause. No whispers. Only regret. Then Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden cross Arthur had given him at the cafe. He looked at it for a moment, then closed his hand around it, almost as if it reminded him that kindness was stronger than revenge. He looked at Sophia one last time and said softly, I'm not locking you out because I hate you. I'm locking the gate because I finally have to protect what's left of my heart. Sophia collapsed onto the front steps, sobbing uncontrollably. For the first time, she understood. The greatest thing she had lost was never the $10 million mansion. It was the man who had loved her when she had nothing. Sophia remained sitting on the front steps of the mansion. Her expensive designer dress, her jewelry, her makeup, none of it mattered anymore. For the first time in years, she saw herself not as a successful woman, but as someone who had thrown away the greatest blessing of her life. The guests quietly began leaving. No one wanted to stay. The glamorous party that had started with laughter ended in complete silence. One by one, luxury cars disappeared into the night. Within minutes, only Daniel, Sophia, Emma, and attorney Michael Brooks remained. Michael stepped closer. Daniel, the legal papers are ready. Daniel looked at the documents, then slowly closed the folder. No. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Daniel smiled gently. I don't want revenge. I never wanted revenge. Michael looked surprised. After everything that's happened? Daniel nodded. Pain doesn't become smaller by giving it to someone else. He walked toward the gate. Sophia looked up through tear-filled eyes. She expected anger. She expected humiliation. Instead, Daniel placed a small envelope on the ground. What is this? Sophia whispered. Daniel answered quietly. It's enough money to help you start over. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. You would still help me? Daniel smiled sadly. I made a promise on our wedding day. To protect you. I may no longer be your husband, but I refuse to become your enemy. Sophia broke down crying. She covered her face with both hands. I don't deserve your kindness. Daniel didn't answer immediately. After a long silence, he said, "Maybe not. But kindness isn't something people earn. It's something we choose to give." Emma stood beside her father, holding his hand tightly. For the first time in years, she finally understood the kind of man he truly was. Weeks passed. The divorce was completed peacefully. There were no public arguments, no courtroom drama, no revenge. Daniel quietly moved into a smaller lakeside home. It wasn't nearly as luxurious, but for the first time in a long while, it felt peaceful. Every Saturday morning, he returned to the same little cafe. The owner smiled as soon as he walked in. "The usual?" Daniel laughed. "Yes. And make 2 coffees." The owner looked around. "You're meeting someone?" Daniel smiled. "Someone always needs a seat at the table." Sometimes, it was a lonely veteran. Sometimes, a struggling student. Sometimes, a single mother trying to feed her children. Daniel paid their bill, shared a kind conversation, and quietly left, without expecting anything in return. One rainy afternoon, a young man rushed into the cafe. He recognized Daniel immediately. "Mr. Carter, I've been looking for you." Daniel looked surprised. The young man placed a photograph on the table. It showed Arthur, the elderly man Daniel had helped weeks earlier. "My grandfather passed away peacefully, but before he died, he asked me to find you." The young man handed Daniel a small wooden box. Inside was the same wooden cross Daniel had carried every day, along with a handwritten note. It read, "True wealth is measured by the lives you change, not the houses you own." Daniel quietly closed the box. A tear rolled down his cheek. He looked out the cafe window as the rain slowly stopped. At that moment, he realized something. The mansion had never made him rich. The businesses had never made him successful. Money had never defined him. His greatest achievement was choosing compassion when he had every reason to choose revenge. Months later, Emma launched a charity in her father's honor. Its mission was simple: helping families rebuild their lives after loss. On opening day, Daniel stood quietly in the back of the room. No spotlight, no speech, no recognition. Just a proud father watching people find hope again. As the audience applauded, Emma looked toward her father and smiled. "This exists because one man taught me that forgiveness is stronger than pride." Daniel smiled and quietly looked toward the sky. Sometimes, the richest people in the world are not the ones who own the biggest houses. They are the ones who leave behind the biggest hearts. If this story touched your heart, please don't leave without showing your support. Red heart. Like this video, subscribe to HeartNest Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional story that can inspire your life. Share this video with your family and friends, because one small act of kindness can change someone's life forever. Thank you for being part of the HeartNest Stories family. We'll see you in the next heartwarming story. Until then, stay kind, stay humble, and take care.